There is a moment somewhere near the middle of Taxi Driver where Travis Bickle picks up the phone, calls Betsy one more time, and gets nothing. No answer. No explanation. Just silence on the other end of a line connecting him to a world that has already moved on without him. He sits with that silence for a second. Then he puts the phone down. The film moves on too. Almost nobody talks about that moment. Most people remember Taxi Driver as the intense one, the violent one, the one with the mirror and the mohawk and the gun. That memory is not wrong. It is just incomplete. Underneath the grit and the danger, Scorsese was constructing something far quieter and far more devastating than a portrait of urban violence. He was building the tragedy of a man who never had a chance, who reached for the world and could not make it hold still long enough to grab. Section 1. The Man in the Metal Box. There is something worth knowing about how Taxi Driver came to exist before a single frame of it is discussed, because the film did not begin as a film. It began as a confession. Paul Schrader was 26 years old when he wrote the script, and by his own account, he was in the worst shape of his life. He had recently lost his job as a film critic. His marriage had ended. A relationship he had begun after leaving his wife had also collapsed entirely. He was living out of his car in Los Angeles, moving between whatever flat surfaces he could find, eating badly, drinking heavily, and going weeks at a time without speaking to another human being in any meaningful way. He carried a loaded gun in the car with him during this period. He said later that he was not entirely certain what the gun was for, which is perhaps the most honest and most frightening thing he ever said about that stretch of his life. He was a person in free fall, who had not yet found anything solid to grab onto. And the free fall had been going on long enough that it had started to feel like the natural condition of things. He ended up in a hospital with a bleeding stomach ulcer, and it was there, flat on his back with nothing to do but think, that the image finally came to him. A taxicab moving through a city at night. A young man sealed inside it, surrounded by millions of people and completely alone. Visible to everyone who passed and known by no one. Floating through the streets in a yellow metal box that went wherever it was directed without any say in the matter. Schrader recognized the image with an immediacy that left no room for doubt, because the image was him. Not a version of him or a metaphor for his situation, but a precise physical description of what his life had become. He checked himself out of the hospital, found a place to sit, kept a loaded gun on the desk beside him while he worked, and finished the script in approximately 2 weeks. He said afterward that if he had not written it, he would have become it. That is not a small statement. That is not the kind of thing a writer says about a project as a way of describing creative investment. It means that the script was the difference between processing something unbearable and being destroyed by it. Taxi Driver existed at its origin as an act of survival. The script made its way to Martin Scorsese through producer Michael Phillips, and Scorsese's response to it was immediate and personal, in a way that went beyond professional recognition of good material. Scorsese had grown up in Little Italy in Lower Manhattan, surrounded by the same streets the film would later make its primary landscape, shaped by the same combination of beauty and decay and barely contained violence that Travis Bickle would spend the entire film struggling to process. He had made Mean Streets in 1973, a film also preoccupied with young men adrift in New York, also circling the gap between who a person wants to be and who their circumstances are making them. When he read Schrader's script, he recognized not just a story he wanted to tell, but a visual language he already knew from the inside. The two men met, found each other immediately, and began what would become one of the most important creative partnerships in the history of American cinema. Scorsese would later say that Taxi Driver was Schrader's film. Schrader would say it was Scorsese's. The truth is that it belonged to both of them, in the way that only work born from genuine mutual recognition tends to belong to anyone. Robert De Niro was not the first choice for Travis Bickle. Scorsese had initially considered Harvey Keitel, who would ultimately take the role of Sport. Jeff Bridges had expressed interest. The decision shifted when Scorsese screened Mean Streets for Schrader and producer Julia Phillips, and the case for De Niro became obvious to everyone in the room. De Niro had recently won an Academy Award for The Godfather Part II, and was already regarded as one of the finest actors of his generation. But what he brought to Travis Bickle went beyond technical skill. He brought an almost reckless willingness to disappear into the character completely, to build Travis not as a performance, but as an inhabited state of being. He obtained a real New York taxi driver's license. He drove a cab around the city for several weeks, picking up actual passengers, absorbing the specific rhythms and textures of the job from the inside. He wanted to know what it felt like to sit behind that wheel at 3 a.m, with strangers climbing in and out of the back seat, to understand the particular quality of attention that work required, and what it did to a person over time. He was simultaneously filming Bernardo Bertolucci's 1900 in Italy during this period, flying back and forth between Rome and New York, finishing a week of shooting in Europe, and then spending days driving a cab through the city before flying back. The physical and logistical difficulty of this arrangement seems almost incomprehensible, and yet the performance he delivered contains no sign of strain or compromise. Travis Bickle is one of the most fully inhabited characters in the history of American cinema, and the completeness of that inhabitation came from a commitment to preparation that most actors would not have attempted and could not have sustained. The production itself was extraordinarily small. The budget was just under $2 million, a number that seems almost fictional given what ended up on screen. Several of the principal actors took significant pay cuts to ensure the film could be completed at all. Filming took place in New York during the summer of 1975, and the city the cameras moved through was not a dressed set designed to suggest danger and decay. New York in 1975 was in genuine, documented crisis. The city had been pushed to the edge of bankruptcy. Essential municipal services had been cut to the bone. The police force had been reduced by thousands of officers. The South Bronx was burning with a regularity that had stopped being news. Times Square, which functions as the moral and geographic center of Travis's world in the film, was at that time one of the most concentrated zones of open prostitution, drug dealing, and street crime in any American city. The people and transactions that Travis describes in his diary as the filth of the city were not invented for atmosphere. They were present, visible, and real. The film simply pointed its cameras at what already existed. Bernard Herrmann composed the score, and it would be the last work of his life. He completed the music mere hours before his death on Christmas Eve, 1975, a fact that gives the score a weight that goes beyond its considerable musical qualities. Herrmann had been the composer behind some of Alfred Hitchcock's most iconic films, Vertigo and Psycho among them, and he brought to Taxi Driver the same understanding of how music can function as psychological interiority rather than emotional instruction. The score he built for the film is centered on a slow, heavy saxophone melody that moves like something half-submerged, dragging itself through the night with no particular destination. Underneath that melody, there is always a low, sustained tension, a pressure that never fully releases. The music does not tell the viewer how to feel about Travis Bickle. It sits beside him in the dark and breathes with him, which turns out to be far more unsettling than any music designed to alarm could have been. The dedication of the film to Herrmann is quiet and earned. He gave the film its nervous system. The opening sequence functions as a thesis statement delivered in images before a single word of dialogue has been spoken. Steam rises from a street grate in slow, thick clouds. A taxi emerges from it as though surfacing from underwater, moving through the frame with a heaviness that feels less like a car driving and more like something alive and exhausted. The city outside the cab windows looks diseased. Michael Chapman's cinematography pushes the colors into deep reds and yellowing oranges, a palette that will hold across the entire film, making New York look less like a place where people live their lives and more like a fever someone is having. Then the film cuts to Travis's eyes behind the windshield, reflecting the street, watching everything with an attention that is total and somehow empty at the same time. Herman's saxophone settles in underneath the image. Within 30 seconds, the film has told the viewer everything essential about the experience they are about to have. They are inside a perspective. They are sealed inside a mind. And that mind is watching the world through glass. Travis Bickle is 26 years old. He served in the United States Marines and was honorably discharged in May of 1973, 2 years before the film begins. He has moved to New York City and taken a night shift job driving a cab because he cannot sleep and has nothing else to do with the hours. He works 12 to 14-hour shifts, 6 or 7 days a week, covering all 5 boroughs, carrying whoever climbs in. He keeps a diary. He reads from it in voiceover throughout the film, in a voice that is always slightly too careful, always monitoring itself for signs of something it does not want to find. The diary is full of small attempts at wisdom, phrases Travis has clearly heard somewhere and written down to see if they might fit his situation. He is building a self from available materials, and the materials are limited and do not quite go together. And the result is something that looks almost coherent from a distance and falls apart on close examination. He does not belong in the city he moves through. This is the central fact of Travis Bickle, and the film establishes it within its first minutes and never allows it to drift from view. He is not part of New York. He is adjacent to it, pressed up against it from inside a sealed container, watching it happen through a window. He sees everyone. No one sees him. The cab is the perfect enclosure for a person in this condition, which is exactly what Schrader understood when the image arrived in that hospital room. The vehicle is not simply a job. It is a form. It is the physical shape of a particular variety of loneliness, the kind that is made worse rather than better by proximity to other people. The kind where the presence of millions of human beings in close quarters somehow deepens the silence rather than filling it. What makes Travis genuinely tragic rather than simply pathetic is that he is not numb. He feels things with an intensity that is actually greater than most of the people around him. He experiences attraction and disgust and longing and rage with a rawness that has no buffer between the feeling and the full force of it. The tragedy is that he has no way of converting those feelings into anything that connects him outward, to other people, to the world, to something larger than himself. Every feeling turns inward. Every impulse, whether toward love or violence, gets filtered through a mind that cannot make lasting contact with anything outside it. He reaches for things and they slide away. He says the wrong thing at the wrong moment. He makes gestures toward the world that land badly or not at all. And after each small failure, he retreats a little further back into the cab, back into the diary, back into the long nights that ask nothing of him except that he keep driving. Schrader said in later years that Taxi Driver is a very rich piece of juvenilia. He meant it as mild self-criticism, an acknowledgement that the film was written by a young man in an extreme state, rather than by a mature writer with distance from his own pain. But the juvenilia quality is not a flaw the film has to overcome. It is the source of its power. The rawness is the point. The absence of distance between the writer and the character is what gives Travis Bickle his texture and his uncomfortable intimacy. When he writes in the diary that someday a real rain will come and wash the scum off the streets, it does not read like a line crafted by a professional screenwriter who has studied the genre. It reads like something a real person actually believed at a real moment in their life, with their full weight behind it. Because in some sense, it was exactly that. The film Martin Scorsese built around that script is one of the most controlled and visually precise works in American cinema. And part of what it controls so carefully from the very beginning is the viewer's relationship to Travis himself. It places you inside his perspective without ever asking you to endorse it. You see what he sees, you hear what he thinks. You ride beside him through the night. And the craft of the film holds you there long past the point where you might otherwise have pulled away. That is the engine of everything that follows. A man in a metal box, moving through a city that cannot hear him, carrying something inside him that is going to have to go somewhere, eventually. The only question the film is interested in is where. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Travis Bickle did not arrive in New York broken. He arrived empty, which turned out to be far more dangerous. In the next section, we move into the city itself and follow Travis through the long hours of the night that slowly finished what the war and the silence had already started. Section 2. A city that never sleeps, and neither does he. New York City in 1975 was in genuine, documented crisis, and this is not a dramatic framing of a backdrop. It is a historical fact that shapes every single thing about the world Travis Bickle moves through, and understanding it in some detail changes how the film feels from beginning to end. The city had been pushed to the edge of bankruptcy by a combination of population loss, industrial decline, and municipal spending that had outrun revenue for years. In October of 1975, just months before the film began shooting, New York came within hours of defaulting on its debt obligations. The Daily News ran a front-page headline that has become one of the most famous in American newspaper history, summarizing the federal government's refusal to bail the city out in terms so blunt they were almost comic. Essential services had been cut to the point where their absence was visible on the street. Garbage collection was unreliable. Fire response times in the poorest neighborhoods had lengthened to the point where buildings burned longer than they should have. The subway system was aging and dangerous, and covered in graffiti so thoroughly that finding a clean surface on a train car had become unusual enough to notice. The police force had been reduced by thousands of officers through layoffs and attrition, and the effects of that reduction were not evenly distributed across the city. In the neighborhoods where Travis works most often, the reduction was felt most sharply. Times Square in 1975 was not the sanitized tourist destination it would eventually become. It was a concentrated zone of prostitution, drug dealing, pornographic theaters, and the transactional desperation that tends to accumulate in places where enforcement is thin and poverty is not. The people Travis describes in his diary with such escalating contempt were not invented for the film. They were there, on those specific blocks, doing those specific things. And the cameras that Martin Scorsese pointed at them were pointing at reality rather than at a set designed to suggest it. Travis moves through all of it every night. His routes take him across all 5 boroughs, through Midtown and Harlem and the West Side, and the areas around Times Square that function as the film's moral center of gravity. He carries whoever climbs in. A drunk couple arguing in the back seat. A nervous man going somewhere he would rather not be seen going. a passenger played by Scorsese himself in a cameo that is more than a director's indulgence. A man who sits in the back of the cab and delivers a detailed, vicious monologue about what he intends to do to his wife with a Magnum, while Travis drives in silence and the meter runs. That last passenger is one of the film's most important minor figures because of what Travis does after carrying him. He goes and buys the same gun the passenger described. The cab is not just transporting Travis through the city. It is conducting the city into him, passenger by passenger, night by night, with no filter and no protection. Travis absorbs all of it. This is one of the most important and least examined aspects of his character, the fact that he does not harden. Most people who work in difficult environments over time develop a kind of psychological insulation, a learned ability to let certain things pass through without sticking. Cab drivers, emergency workers, anyone whose job requires sustained exposure to human suffering and human ugliness at close range eventually develops some version of this insulation, simply in order to continue functioning. Travis never develops it. Every prostitute on the corner, every drug transaction in a doorway, every passenger carrying hatred or desperation or both lands on him and stays there. He has no mechanism for discharge. The city pours into him every night, and he takes it all home with him to a small, bare apartment and sits with it in the dark until the next shift begins. His apartment is worth describing carefully because the choices Scorsese and production designer Charles Rosen made about it are doing quiet but specific work. It is not dramatically squalid. There is nothing about it designed to signal obvious neglect or poverty. It is simply sparse in a way that suggests someone who never quite moved in, someone who is occupying a space rather than inhabiting it. There are almost no decorations. There is no evidence of a personal history displayed anywhere. A charred Viet Cong flag is tacked to one wall, one of the film's few visible connections to Travis's life before New York, before the cab, before the nights. There is a television that Travis watches with the sound off. There is the table where he keeps his diary and where he will eventually lay out his guns. There is a small kitchen where he eats alone. The apartment is less a home than a holding area, a place where the body is stored between shifts while the mind continues whatever it was already doing out there in the city. The insomnia is central to everything. Travis mentions it in his very first conversation in the film, telling the dispatcher during his job interview that he cannot sleep at night, and if he is going to be awake anyway, he might as well get paid for it. The dispatcher does not ask why he cannot sleep. In the world of the film, quiet suffering of this kind is not remarkable enough to pause for. Travis gets the job. He goes out into the night. And the nights, accumulating across weeks and then months of the film's timeline, become a kind of sustained wakefulness that starts to blur the line between what is real and what is the product of a mind that has not had enough rest in a very long time. Sleep deprivation does specific and documented things to human psychology. It degrades judgment in ways the affected person is typically unable to perceive from the inside. It heightens emotional reactivity, making ordinary provocations feel disproportionately large and genuine threats feel existential. It makes the world feel more hostile than it is, and makes the gap between how things appear and how they actually are increasingly difficult to assess. It strips away the mental buffers that normally allow a person to process difficult experiences without being overwhelmed by them. For Travis, who already has limited buffers and an unusually porous relationship to the suffering he witnesses, the insomnia is not a symptom sitting alongside his other problems. It is an accelerant. Every night he spends awake and driving is another night the pressure builds without release. Another night the city is conducted into him, with nothing being processed or discharged. He fills the non-driving hours with the only things available to him. He spends time in pornographic theaters on his breaks, sitting in the dark among strangers, watching images that have nothing to do with connection. He eats at a diner counter alone. He pops pills that the film never identifies. He pours something into a glass at the kitchen table after a shift and drinks it in the blue light of the television. These details are not presented as character flaws to be judged. They are presented as the behavioral landscape of a person trying, in the only ways available to him, to dull a noise that never fully stops. Nothing works. The theaters do not relax him. The pills do not quiet anything. The alcohol does not bring sleep. He simply continues, shift after shift, carrying the city inside him, with nowhere permanent to put any of it. The other cab drivers provide a kind of accidental Greek chorus to Travis's situation. A group of men who have found various ways of making peace with the same work and the same city that is slowly destroying him. There is a driver named Wizard, played by Peter Boyle, with a warm, rumpled quality that makes him immediately likable and immediately limited. Wizard is older, settled, philosophical in the vague way of a person who has developed a relationship with uncertainty by deciding not to look at it too directly. When Travis, in a rare moment of genuine openness, tries to tell Wizard that something is going wrong inside him, that he has been having thoughts he cannot account for, that he needs something he cannot name, Wizard responds with a long and meandering speech about how a man becomes his job, how you just go with it, how things have a way of working out. The speech is warm and completely empty. Wizard is doing his best, and his best is nowhere near sufficient for what Travis is trying to say. Travis listens to the whole thing and then says, quietly, that it is about the dumbest thing he has ever heard. He is not being cruel. He is being accurate. The speech did not reach him because the speech was not built for the terrain it was trying to cover. What Travis needed in that moment was someone who could sit with the specific weight of what he was carrying and help him understand it. What he got was general reassurance delivered by a man who does not have the vocabulary for what is being described. The door that might have opened stays shut, not because anyone chose to close it, but because the people around Travis simply do not have the tools the situation required. And Travis goes back out into the night, unchanged. The pressure unchanged. The city waiting outside as it always is. The visual language Scorsese and Chapman developed for the city sequences gives New York a psychological weight that goes beyond documentary realism. The colors are wrong in a way that is precise rather than arbitrary. The reds bleed. The yellows are sickly. The lights from storefronts and street lamps reflect in the wet pavement in pools that look less like reflections and more like wounds in the surface of the street. Steam rises from grates in clouds that obscure figures and then dissolve, making the people moving through the frame appear and disappear like thoughts. The city in Taxi Driver looks the way a fever feels, not dramatically, not with the heightened unreality of a dream sequence, but with the specific, grinding wrongness of a temperature that has been slightly too high for slightly too long. There is a camera movement the film returns to across the night driving sequences. A slow drift away from Travis behind the wheel toward the street outside, as though the camera itself is being pulled toward the city's window. It drifts and then returns, drifts and returns. The rhythm of it mirrors Travis's own relationship to what he sees, drawn toward it, unable to stop watching, unable to enter it. He is fixed at the glass. The city moves on the other side of it. When he first sees Betsy walking along the sidewalk in a white dress, he has been sitting at that glass for weeks of identical nights, full of everything the city has poured into him, and empty of anything that connects him to another person. She looks clean to him. She looks untouched. She looks like an exit from the glass. Whether she actually is any of those things is the question the film is about to spend its next 40 minutes answering. And the answer it gives is the one that changes everything. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Travis found the city and let it fill him completely, night after night, with nowhere for any of it to go. Now he has seen something through the glass that looks different from everything else. In the next section, we follow him toward Betsy, and toward the first and most quietly devastating of all his failures to make contact with the world outside the cab. Section 3. The Girl in White. There is a particular kind of longing that does not begin with a person. It begins with an image. Travis Bickle sees Betsy for the first time through the windshield of his cab, walking along the street near the campaign office where she works, and what he describes in his diary afterward has almost nothing to do with who she actually is. He calls her an angel. He says she appeared like a goddess from the filth, that she is the most beautiful woman he has ever seen, that she is different from everyone around her. He writes about her with a specific, airless intensity that has no room in it for curiosity about who she might be as a human being. He has not spoken to her yet. He does not know her name. But the idea of her is already complete inside his mind, sealed and perfect, before the reality of her has had any chance to complicate it. This is the first thing to understand about Travis and Betsy. He does not pursue her because he is drawn to her personality or her intelligence or anything she has actually shown him. He pursues her because she fits the slot in his psychology that has been waiting, under enormous pressure, for something to fill it. He has been driving through the worst of the city for weeks, absorbing everything, finding nowhere to put any of it. And Betsy arrives at exactly the right moment to become the container for everything he has been unable to process. She looks clean to him. She looks untouched by the world he has been drowning in every night. Whether she actually is any of those things is beside the point. Travis needs her to be them, and so she is. The color white is doing something deliberate in the film every time Betsy appears. Scorsese and costume designer Ruth Morley made specific choices about dressing her in light colors, often white or cream, against the deep reds and sickly yellows that dominate the film's visual palette everywhere else. In a movie where the city looks like a wound, Betsy looks like something outside the wound. She registers visually as separate from her environment in a way that no other character in the film does. And that visual separation is not accidental. It is the external version of what Travis is experiencing internally when he looks at her. The film is showing the viewer, through color and light, exactly what Travis sees when he sees Betsy, which is not a woman, but a category, not a person, but a principle. She is the clean thing in the dirty world, the lit thing in the dark. And Travis, who has been sitting in the dark for a very long time, cannot look away from her. He walks into the campaign office where she works for Senator Charles Palantine and introduces himself with a directness that is almost startling. He tells her he has seen her and found her to be the most beautiful woman he has ever watched from a distance. He is strange and awkward, and yet there is something in his manner that is also oddly sincere. A total absence of the calculated presentation most people deploy when they are trying to impress someone. He has no game. He has no charm in the conventional sense. What he has is a kind of absolute earnestness
that Betsy finds interesting enough or unusual enough to say yes to coffee. Sybil Shepherd plays Betsy with a precise, thoughtful quality that gets undervalued in most discussions of the film. She is not shallow. She is not simply the beautiful woman who rejects the protagonist. She sees something in Travis that she cannot quite name, and she is genuinely curious about it.
At least for a short time. Albert Brooks plays Tom, Betsy's co-worker, in a small but carefully positioned role. Tom is everything Travis is not in the conventional social sense. He is easy, articulate, comfortable with himself, able to move through a professional environment with the kind of frictionless confidence that comes from years of belonging to the world he occupies. When Travis fixates on Tom as a romantic competitor, reading a threat into what is clearly just a collegial working relationship, the fixation reveals something precise about the way Travis processes social environments. He cannot read neutrality. He cannot identify the absence of threat because he has spent so long in environments where threat was ambient that neutral interactions no longer compute. Tom is simply a person doing his job alongside Betsy. Travis sees him as an obstacle, a rival, a reason to be suspicious. The misreading is not random. It is the product of a mind that has been marinating in the city's worst expressions of human behavior for so long that it has lost the ability to recognize ordinary harmlessness when it appears. Their coffee date is one of the most carefully written scenes in the film because it shows exactly how Travis functions in social situations involving emotional stakes. He cannot find common ground. Every attempt Betsy makes to locate shared territory runs into a wall. She asks about his background, and he deflects. She tries to read him using a Chris Christopherson lyric, calling him a prophet and a pushover, and he does not know the song she is quoting. He asks her about a coworker she clearly has no romantic interest in, fixating on the idea that the man is a competitor, reading a threat into a situation where none exists. He is sitting across from a woman who is giving him genuine attention, and he does not know what to do with it. He does not have the emotional vocabulary to receive warmth without immediately converting it into something else, something more manageable, something more like a problem he can solve. Betsy's observation across that coffee table, that Travis is a walking contradiction, is one of the most precisely aimed lines in the entire script. She says it lightly, almost playfully, the way someone might point out an interesting quality in a person they are still deciding about. But she is right in a way she does not yet fully understand. Travis is a contradiction assembled from incompatible parts. He visits pornographic theaters, and he romanticizes female purity. He is disgusted by the city's sexuality, and he is unable to stop exposing himself to it. He wants human connection, and he has no idea how to tolerate it when it arrives. He presents himself as a man with strong moral convictions, and he cannot identify the inconsistency between those convictions and his own daily behavior. Betsy sees the surface of this contradiction from across a coffee cup and finds it interesting. What she cannot see yet is how deep it goes, or what it will mean for the thing she is considering walking toward. And yet, despite all of this, the date works in its way. Betsy agrees to see him again. She is still curious. Travis goes home and writes about her with the kind of breathless hopefulness that is painful to read in retrospect, knowing what is coming. He has had a good evening with another human being, possibly for the first time in a very long time. And the diary entry reads like a man trying to remember how this is supposed to feel. Trying to file the sensation somewhere safe before it disappears. There is something genuinely moving in this entry, in the gap between the tenderness of what Travis is feeling and the absolute certainty of what is about to happen to it. The viewer carries that gap into the second date and sits with it through every moment of what follows. Then comes the second date, and the thing Travis does that ends everything. He takes her to a pornographic film. He takes her to a pornographic film not because he is trying to shock her or degrade her or test her in some deliberate way. He takes her because pornographic theaters are among the only places he goes when he is not working. And the idea that this might not be an appropriate choice for an early date simply does not occur to him. When Schrader described this moment in interviews, he made the point that Travis is not being perverse. He is being himself, which is the more tragic version of the same action. He is taking her somewhere he actually goes. The problem is that where Travis actually goes reveals a gap between his internal world and the shared social world so wide that Betsy cannot find a way across it. She walks out. She is not cruel about it. She does not humiliate him. She simply leaves. And when he tries to follow her outside to explain, she is already going. Whatever she saw in him across the coffee table, whatever made her curious enough to give him a second chance, has been replaced by something that she cannot get past. Travis does not understand what happened. This is perhaps the saddest element of the entire scene. He calls her at the campaign office afterward, multiple times. He sends flowers. He goes to the office in person and stands at the reception desk trying to get her to come out and speak to him. And the receptionist tells him she does not want to see him. And Travis stands there for a moment with that information landing on him in real time, in public, with people moving around him. And then he leaves. He cannot process the rejection because he cannot locate the cause of it from the inside. He was being himself. She left. The connection between those two facts is not one he has the tools to make. There is something particularly painful about the phone calls. Travis calls the campaign office multiple times from a payphone, and the film gives the viewer one of those calls in detail. Travis standing in the phone booth with traffic moving behind him, trying to explain himself to a woman who has already made her decision. His voice going through the specific register of a person who is trying very hard to sound calm while being the opposite of calm. He asks if she received the flowers. He says he does not understand what he did wrong. He says he would like to take her somewhere else, somewhere she would prefer, if she will just tell him where that is. The call ends without resolution. Travis hangs up. The film holds on him for a moment in the phone booth, the city moving past the glass on all sides, and then moves on. The phone booth is another version of the cab, another glass enclosure, another moment of Travis pressing himself against a surface that separates him from something he cannot reach. There is a moment after she stops taking his calls where Travis sits in his cab outside the campaign office and watches the people moving in and out through the glass doors. He watches Betsy moving inside, visible through the window, talking to people, laughing at something, entirely unaware of him sitting out there in the dark. The camera stays with him for a long time in that shot. Herman's score drops into something that is barely music at all, just a low, sustained note sitting underneath the silence. Travis is doing what he has always done, watching the world from behind glass, unable to enter it. But now the glass has a specific face on the other side, a specific proof that he tried and failed. And the weight of that is different from the general loneliness. The general loneliness is ambient. This is targeted. This has a location. What the rejection of Betsy does to Travis is not simply make him sad or angry, though it does both of those things. What it does, at a deeper level, is confirm a story he has already been quietly telling himself for a long time. The story is that the world does not have a place for him, that he reached out toward something real and good and it moved away from him,
that his presence in the world, his genuine attempt to connect, produced nothing but a door closing. He takes this not as information about the specific situation with Betsy, but as evidence of something universal, something about himself and his relationship to everything outside the cab. And once you understand the story Travis is telling himself after Betsy walks away, the direction in which he begins to move starts to make a terrible kind of sense. There is also something specific about Betsy's connection to Senator Palantine that the film handles carefully. Travis meets Palantine in person when the senator climbs into his cab one afternoon, surrounded by aides needing a ride. It is a brief scene, but a loaded one. Travis and Palantine talk for a few minutes. Travis asks what Palantine thinks the people want, what the people are looking for. Palantine gives a politician's answer, something smooth and general about giving power back to the people. Travis nods. He seems, in this moment, genuinely open to the idea that this man might represent something worthwhile. There is no hostility yet. The hostility will come later, and it will not really be about Palantine's politics. It will be about Betsy. Palantine is the thing she gave her time and belief to instead of him, and eventually, that will be enough to make him a target. Scorsese films the Palantine cab ride with a quiet, observational quality that keeps both men at a careful distance from each other, even in a physically small space. The senator is charming and professional, and completely unaware that the man driving him is measuring him in a way that has nothing to do with his platform. Travis watches Palantine in the rearview mirror with an expression that is not yet hostile, but is already categorizing. He is filing Palantine away somewhere, not in the general category of passengers, but somewhere more specific, somewhere that will become important later. The senator gets out, the aides follow, the door closes, and Travis sits for a moment before pulling back into traffic. The encounter lasted a few minutes. The impression it made will last considerably longer. Betsy herself disappears from the film for a long stretch after the rejection, which is the right structural choice. She has served her purpose in the architecture of Travis's psychology, and the film does not need her present to show what her absence is doing. What she leaves behind in Travis is a specific shape of hurt. The hurt of someone who tried to cross the distance between himself and another person and found the distance was not crossable. He took what he had, which was all he had, and offered it, and it was not enough. That wound does not close. It does not become something he absorbs and moves past. It becomes part of the pressure that keeps building, slowly, with nowhere to go, until eventually, something has to give. Paul Schrader understood this dynamic from the inside because he had lived adjacent to it. His stated experience during the period he was writing the script, the weeks of isolation, the sense of being sealed off from ordinary human connection, the anger that accumulates when loneliness goes on long enough, was the soil the Betsy storyline grew from. He knew what it felt like to want something ordinary, something as simple as another person's genuine attention, and to find yourself unable to receive it or keep it. The tragedy of Travis and Betsy is not that they were wrong for each other in some fundamental way. The tragedy is that Travis could not be in a relationship with an actual person. He could only be in a relationship with the idea of a person, and the actual person, by simply existing and having limits and making ordinary decisions, could never survive contact with the idea Travis needed her to be. Betsy was always going to leave, not because she was cruel or indifferent, but because the role Travis had assigned her was one no real human being could fill. The angel he described in his diary on the night he first saw her was a projection. The woman who walked out of the pornographic theater was the reality. And Travis, who had no framework for holding both of those things about the same person at the same time, was left with a wound that the film will spend its remaining hour carefully, patiently, and devastatingly filling with something far more dangerous than heartbreak. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Betsy's rejection does not break Travis all at once. It works slowly, over the days and nights that follow, feeding something that was already hungry. In the next section, we go inside his diary, inside his voiceover, and follow the sound of a mind quietly losing its grip on itself. Section 4. God's Lonely Man. There is a line Travis writes in his diary that the film offers early, almost casually, as though it is just one more entry among many. Loneliness has followed me my whole life, everywhere. In bars, in cars, sidewalks, stores, everywhere. There is no escape. He writes it plainly, without drama, in the same flat voice he uses to note the weather or describe a passenger. And that flatness is the thing to hold on to. Because a person who writes about total, inescapable loneliness, with no particular emotion attached to the words, is not someone who has just discovered they are lonely. That is the voice of someone for whom the loneliness has become so familiar it no longer registers as a feeling. It has become a condition, like the weather, like the streets, like the insomnia, simply the atmosphere in which everything else happens. The diary is the spine of Taxi Driver in a structural sense. The film does not have a conventional plot engine, no ticking clock, no straightforward goal being pursued. What it has instead is this internal record, this ongoing document of one man's experience of his own existence. And the voiceover that delivers it gives the film its particular texture and rhythm. Travis reads from the diary in a voice that is always slightly too careful, always slightly too measured, like someone who is monitoring the sound of his own thoughts for signs of something dangerous. He is narrating himself. He is trying to put himself into language, to make himself legible to some imagined reader, and the effort of that narration is itself a kind of symptom. There is no actual reader. The diary is not being written for anyone. And yet Travis writes with the consistency and the deliberateness of a person who believes, on some level, that the record matters. But the account of his experience deserves to exist somewhere outside his own head, even if nobody will ever find it. The physical act of writing the diary is worth thinking about for a moment. Travis sits at his kitchen table, usually late at night or in the early morning after a shift, and he puts words to the day. He does this when he could be sleeping, which he cannot do, or watching the television with the sound off, which he also does, or simply sitting in the dark with whatever is moving through him. He chooses to write. That choice is not nothing. It suggests a person who is still trying, at some level, to process his experience rather than simply endure it. The diary is Travis's only real attempt at self-examination, his only tool for looking at what is happening inside him and trying to give it a shape. The tragedy is that the tool is not adequate to the task. The language he has available to him is not precise enough, not flexible enough, not honest enough with itself to actually reach what needs to be examined. He writes around the wound rather than into it, circling it with phrases that almost fit, with observations that get close and then veer away. And the circling itself is a form of documentation, even if the wound at the center is never directly named. The diary entries are not literary. Travis does not have a sophisticated relationship with language. He reaches for the kinds of phrases he has probably heard somewhere, maybe from a preacher, maybe from a self-help pamphlet, maybe from the kinds of cheap wisdom that circulates in the environments he has moved through. You are only as healthy as you feel. He is trying to build a worldview from fragments, trying to assemble a philosophy out of pieces that were never meant to fit together. The result is something that sounds almost coherent from a distance, but falls apart on close examination, like a wall built from the wrong materials. It holds for a while, then it does not. De Niro's delivery of the voiceover is one of the performance's most under-examined qualities. He reads the diary entries in a voice that is slightly flatter than his speaking voice in the film's dialogue scenes, a register that suggests a person who has been rehearsing these sentences inside his head before committing them to the page, who has edited them down to something that sounds measured even when the content is not measured at all. There is a gap between the tone of the delivery and the content of what is being said that is present from the very first voiceover and that widens as the film progresses. The voice stays calm. The words become less calm. By the film's midpoint, the diary entries are describing increasingly dark and categorical thoughts in the same unhurried, carefully modulated tone that was used at the beginning to describe the weather and the night shift hours. The contrast between the steadiness of the voice and the deterioration of the content is one of the film's most quietly effective methods of showing the viewer what is happening to Travis without announcing it. Schrader drew the diary voice from multiple sources. He cited the actual diaries of Arthur Bremer, the young man who shot presidential candidate George Wallace in 1972, as a primary reference. Bremer's diaries, later published as An Assassin's Diary, have a quality that is simultaneously mundane and deeply disturbing, full of the small observations of a person who is watching himself move toward violence without quite being able to stop or redirect the momentum. They have no grand ideology, no coherent political position. They have instead a kind of relentless self-focus, a man trapped in his own head, measuring himself against the world and finding the gap between what he is and what he believed he would be completely unbearable. Schrader recognized in those diaries the same voice he had been living with inside himself, and he built Travis's internal monologue from the intersection of Bremer's actual words and his own experience of that particular psychological terrain. The title of this section comes from a phrase that floats through the film's atmosphere without being stated directly in any single line of dialogue or diary entry. God's lonely man. It is a phrase with a history in American writing, appearing in the work of Thomas Wolfe, among others, and it carries a specific connotation that fits Travis with uncomfortable precision. The God's lonely man is not simply a person who is alone. He is a person who experiences his loneliness as a form of distinction, as evidence of a sensitivity or a perception or a calling that the people around him do not share and cannot understand. His loneliness is not a failure of connection. It is, in his own reading of his situation, proof of something. Proof that he sees more clearly. Proof that he feels more deeply. Proof that the world has not yet caught up to what he is. Travis never states this self-conception explicitly because he does not have the vocabulary for it. But it is present in the diary's undertone, in the way he writes about the city's filth as something visible only to him, in the way he positions himself as the one awake and watching, while everyone else sleeps through what is actually happening around them. The religious undertone in the diary is subtle but persistent. Travis describes himself in terms that echo a particular tradition of spiritual language, the language of a person who feels called or chosen or set apart, without quite having a coherent theology to attach those feelings to. He refers to himself at various points as someone who has been given a special ability to see clearly what others refuse to see, to perceive the true nature of the world around him while everyone else moves through it blind. Martin Scorsese has spoken about this dimension of the character in terms of his own Catholic upbringing, noting that Travis resembles a kind of inverted saint, someone whose impulse toward purification and cleansing has no legitimate channel, and so turns toward violence instead. The saint wants to clean the world by becoming clean himself. Travis wants to clean the world by eliminating what he has decided is unclean. The shape of the impulse is similar. The direction is catastrophically different. As the film moves forward, and the rejection by Betsy settles into Travis's psychology, the diary entries change in a way that is gradual enough to miss if you are not paying close attention. The tone shifts. The flatness that was always there becomes something harder. The observations about the city, which were always dark, begin to tip into something closer to judgment. He begins writing about the passengers he carries and the people he sees on the street in terms that are less descriptive and more categorical, sorting them into things that should be allowed to exist and things that should not. The language becomes binary in a way it was not before. The gray areas close up. The world outside the cab begins to look, in the diary's pages, like something that has been waiting for someone to act on it. He writes, at one point, that someday a real rain will come and wash the scum off the streets. This line has been quoted so many times since the film's release that it has become a kind of shorthand for the whole character. And it deserves to be read slowly rather than simply recognized. The image Travis reaches for is a natural one. Rain is purification. Rain is the thing that comes and cleanses without anyone having to make a decision. But the word someday is doing something important in that sentence. Travis is waiting for an external force to act on the world he finds intolerable. He is waiting for the rain. And the film's entire second half is the slow process by which Travis stops waiting for the rain and begins to believe that he is the rain. The voiceover carries something else as well, something that works on the viewer in ways that are easy to absorb without fully noticing. Because we hear Travis's thoughts directly, because the film grants us access to his interior in a way it does not grant access to any other character, we are structurally positioned to understand him, not to agree with him, not to endorse what he thinks or does, but to understand the texture of his experience, the internal logic of his perceptions, the specific way the world looks from inside his particular mind. Leonardo DiCaprio described watching Taxi Driver at 15 and feeling profound empathy for Travis, identifying with him completely, following him down the road he was traveling, and then arriving at a point where the film suddenly made clear who this person actually was, and feeling blindsided by his own empathy. That response is not a mistake on DiCaprio's part. It is the correct response to a film that has been very carefully designed to produce exactly that movement. There are moments in the diary where something else surfaces briefly. Travis writes about wanting to do something, wanting his life to have meant something, wanting to be a different kind of person than he seems to be. These moments are few, and they pass quickly, but they are there. Small glimpses of a person who is aware, at some level, that what he is not what he had imagined himself to be. The war is not discussed in detail. Vietnam hangs over the character as an implication rather than an explanation. The charred flag on the apartment wall, the honorable discharge, the fact that he came back from somewhere that did violence to whatever he might have been before he went, and came back to a country that had already moved on from the war and had no particular interest in what it had cost the people who were there. Travis does not talk about Vietnam explicitly. The film does not use it as a simple explanation for his condition, but it is present as a background radiation, a thing that shaped him in ways that neither he nor the film fully articulates. The country that Travis came back to in May of 1973 was itself in a state of considerable disorder. The Watergate hearings were consuming Washington. The anti-war movement had spent years producing a cultural atmosphere in which returning veterans were received not with the gratitude of previous generations, but with something ranging from indifference to open hostility. Travis arrived from a war the country wanted to stop thinking about, in a uniform the country associated with a policy the country had decided was wrong, into a city that was already in the early stages of the financial and social collapse that would define it by the middle of the decade. There was no infrastructure to receive him. There was no cultural vocabulary for what he might be carrying. He was simply one more young man finding his way into the city, and the city doing with him what it did with everyone, absorbing him and moving on without stopping to ask what the absorption cost. What the diary ultimately documents is not a descent into madness in the dramatic sense of that phrase. It documents something quieter and more ordinary, and in some ways more frightening. It documents a person who was always struggling to stay connected to the world, who made a serious attempt at connection through Betsy and failed, and who is now slowly reorganizing his entire understanding of himself and his place in things around the only story that makes the failure bearable. The story is that the world deserves what is coming to it, that the problem is not inside him but outside, on the streets, in the faces of the people he carries and watches and cannot reach, that his anger is not a symptom but a response, not a disorder, but a clarity. The diary is where Travis builds that story, entry by entry, night by night, in the flat, careful voice of a man who has found a purpose and does not yet know what it will cost.
Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The diary gave Travis a language for what he was feeling. What he needed next was a direction. In the next section, a 12-year-old girl climbs into his cab and changes everything, offering Travis the one thing his psychology was most desperately searching for: someone to save. Section 5. Iris and the weight of saving. There is a night, early in the film, before Travis has fully committed to any particular course of action, when a young girl throws herself into the back seat of his cab. She is small and blonde and moving fast, like someone running from something. She tells him to drive. And then, before Travis can process what is happening, before he can decide what to do, a man yanks the door open and pulls her back out onto the street. The man throws a crumpled $20 bill through the window at Travis, a payment for the inconvenience. A casual gesture that communicates without words that this is a transaction, and Travis is a minor obstacle in it. Travis sits there holding the bill. He stares at it. The cab pulls away. That is the whole scene. It lasts maybe 30 seconds. But something in it lodges in Travis the way a splinter lodges under skin. Small and invisible, and impossible to stop touching. The girl is Iris Steensma. She is 12 years old. She is played by Jodie Foster, who was 13 when the film was shot in the summer of 1975. Her pimp is a man named Sport, played by Harvey Keitel, who manages her with a combination of physical intimidation and a specific kind of performed tenderness that is more disturbing than the intimidation, because it is designed to make her feel chosen rather than trapped. Iris has been working the streets around the Hotel Hell on the west side. She wears a flat cap and layered clothing, and speaks in a voice that is trying to sound older and more certain than it is. She is a child doing an enormous amount of work to appear as though she is not. Travis does not forget her. In the days after that brief encounter, she reappears in his mind the way the crumpled 20 reappeared in his hand, something he cannot simply discard and move past.
The city is full of suffering that Travis registers and then drives away from, because there is no other option. Because a cab driver cannot stop for every broken thing he sees, or he would never move at all. But Iris is different.
And the film is careful and honest about why she is different, in a way that less thoughtful storytelling would not be. She is different because Travis needs her to be different. She is different because she arrived at a moment when Travis was already raw from Betsy's rejection, already reorganizing his relationship to the world, already looking for something to do with the pressure building inside him. She is the first person since Betsy who has given his attention somewhere specific to land. He seeks her out. He finds her on the street one evening and negotiates with Sport for her time, paying the going rate to spend an hour with her in a room in the hotel. What happens in that room is one of the most quietly extraordinary sequences in the film. Travis does not touch her. He sits across from her and talks to her, which is the last thing she was expecting, and which she does not initially know how to process. She is practiced at a certain kind of interaction, and this is not it. She keeps trying to redirect the conversation toward what she assumes he wants, and he keeps redirecting it back toward the question he actually has, which is why she is here and whether she wants to leave. Iris talks around the question for a while. She is not simple, and the film does not treat her as simple. She is a child who has constructed a working philosophy around her situation, a set of beliefs and attitudes that make it possible for her to continue existing inside it without being destroyed by it. She talks about Sport as though he is her boyfriend, as though the arrangement between them is a choice she made freely and continues to make freely. She says she does not need saving. She says she is doing fine. And there is something in the way she says these things that is both genuinely believed and obviously learned. The words of someone who has been told a story about herself for long enough that she has started to use it in her own voice. Travis listens to all of this without argument. He does not try to dismantle her perspective in the room. He simply says, quietly and with absolute certainty, that she should not be here. That this is no place for her, that there is somewhere better she could go. He leaves her with some money and a number to call. He tells her to think about it. And then he goes, back into the city, back into the cab, carrying the conversation with him in the same way he has been carrying everything else. The dynamic between Travis and Iris has been analyzed extensively over the decades since the film's release, and the analysis tends to focus on the question of whether Travis's desire to save her is genuinely altruistic, or whether it is, in some more complicated way, about his own needs. The honest answer that the film arrives at, carefully and without judgment, is that it is both simultaneously, and that the combination of those two things does not cancel either one out. Travis genuinely cares about what is happening to Iris. His distress at her situation is real. But the saving of Iris also gives Travis something he urgently needs, which is a mission, a purpose, a direction for the energy that has been building inside him since the night Betsy walked away. He was moving toward violence before he found Iris. The diary makes this clear. The city was already categorized in his mind into things that deserved to exist and things that did not. The gun purchases were already being contemplated. The physical training was already beginning. Iris does not create the violent impulse in Travis. What she does is give it a shape and a justification that he can live with. He is no longer a man sliding toward destruction for reasons he cannot fully articulate. He is a man with a specific enemy and a specific person to protect. The violence, when it comes, will be on her behalf. This is the story he tells himself, and it is true enough to function as a real story, even though it is also, in ways Travis cannot see, a story he needed to be true.
The relationship they develop across several meetings is genuinely tender, in ways that complicate any simple reading of Travis as purely dangerous or Iris as purely a victim. They eat breakfast together in a diner, a scene that Roger Ebert described as one of the most touching in the film. Travis eats and watches her. Iris eats sugar on toast and talks about the commune she wants to go to, the life she is going to have somewhere far from the city. She is luminous and sad and funny, and completely unaware of how much danger her situation contains, because the danger has been her ordinary life for long enough that it no longer looks like danger. Travis watches her with an expression that has none of the tightness or intensity he wears everywhere else. He is simply present with her, in a way he is not present anywhere else in the film. Whatever he is in the cab, in the diary, in front of the mirror, here he is just a person, sitting across from another person and paying attention. Scorsese shoots the diner scenes with a warmth that is noticeably different from the film's dominant visual register. The light is softer. The camera moves more gently. Even Herman's score in these sequences has a different quality. Quieter, less pressurized. The film is acknowledging what is real in the connection between these two damaged people, without romanticizing it or excusing the context it exists inside. Travis is a deeply disturbed man. Iris is a child in a desperate situation. And they are also, in these small moments over breakfast, simply two lonely people who have found each other, and who are, for the duration of a meal, slightly less alone than they were before. Iris eventually agrees to leave. She asks Travis to help her get out. And this is the moment where the mission becomes fully formed inside Travis's psychology. Because now it is not a unilateral decision he has made about someone else's life. She has asked him. She has confirmed what he already believed, that the situation is wrong and that she needs out. And the confirmation arrives at exactly the moment when Travis has been building himself into something capable of decisive action. He has guns. He has been training. He has been rehearsing, in the mirror and in the diary, for an act of violence that he has been framing as purification. Iris's request gives that act a human face and a human reason. He is going to save her. He is going to walk into the place that holds her, and he is going to take her out of it, by force if necessary. What Travis cannot see, and what the film shows the viewer clearly enough without ever stating it directly, is that Iris did not ask to be saved by this particular method. She asked for help leaving a bad situation. Travis heard that as permission to do what he was already planning to do. The gap between what she asked for and what he is preparing to deliver is the gap between a person who has genuine needs and a person who has decided what the solution to those needs looks like before fully understanding the needs themselves. Travis loves Iris in the limited way he is capable of loving anything, which is to say, he loves the idea of her safety, the idea of her rescue, the idea of himself as the person who provides it. Whether the rescue itself will be something she survives, something the film leaves genuinely uncertain for a long time, is a question Travis has not paused to ask. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Travis found his reason. Now he needed his weapon, his body, his armor. In the next section, we watch him build himself into something else entirely, piece by piece, in the silence of his apartment, in front of a mirror that shows him exactly what he wants to see. Section 6. The Gun and the Body. There is a sequence in Taxi Driver that has no dialogue and almost no music and lasts several minutes. and it is one of the most carefully observed passages of filmmaking in the entire film. Travis is in his apartment. He has purchased 4 handguns from an illegal dealer named Easy Andy, who arrived at a hotel room with a suitcase full of weapons and talked about each one with the casual expertise of a man selling office supplies. Travis bought a Charter Arms undercover, a .38 Smith & Wesson, a Colt .25 automatic, and the .44 Magnum that Scorsese's character described in the back of the cab with such specific and disturbing detail weeks earlier. He now has all 4 of them laid out on his kitchen table, and he sits there and looks at them. What follows is Travis building things. He constructs a sleeve mechanism that will allow him to slide a gun from his forearm into his hand with a single movement. No reaching, no fumbling, just a flick of the wrist and the weapon appears. He works on this mechanism with patience and precision, testing it repeatedly, adjusting the angles until the motion is smooth and automatic. He builds a small wooden platform to practice his draws. He does push-ups and sit-ups in the narrow floor space of his apartment, working his body with the same methodical focus he brings to the weapons. He eats differently. He stops drinking. He runs through the streets at night after his shifts, adding miles gradually, building endurance. He stares at himself in the bathroom mirror and flexes and takes stock of what he is becoming. The transformation sequence is shot almost entirely in close-up and medium shot, the camera staying close to the body, to the hands and the weapons and the muscles. Scorsese and Chapman make a deliberate choice to frame this process in a way that is neither glorifying nor disgusted. The camera simply watches. It records. It follows the hands as they work on the sleeve mechanism with the same neutral attention it gave to Travis driving through the night streets. This neutrality is one of the film's most challenging qualities for a viewer to sit with, because it refuses to tell you how to feel about what you are watching. The preparation is meticulous. The craft is real. Whether it is right or wrong, the film declines in these sequences to say. Easy Andy deserves a longer look than he usually gets in discussions of the film. He arrives in a single scene, delivered by Stephen Prince, in a performance that is loose and funny and slightly chilling in the way that genuine charm deployed in a completely amoral context tends to be. Andy lays out his wares on the hotel bed and talks about each gun with love, describing the stopping power of the Magnum, the concealability of the .25, the reliability of the .38, in a way that is almost affectionate. He is a merchant. He likes his products. He has no particular interest in what Travis plans to do with them, because that is not his department. The transaction is clean and professional, and the film does not editorialize about it. Travis buys the guns. Andy packs up the suitcase. They shake hands. The scene ends. What the scene with Easy Andy accomplishes is something specific in the film's architecture. It is the moment of no return, though it does not announce itself as such. Up until this moment, Travis's violence has been internal, a quality of his thinking, a tone in the diary. The guns make it external. They give it physical form. They move it from something Travis feels and thinks about into something that now exists in the world, laid out on a table, real and heavy and chambered. The decision to arm himself is also, in a quiet way, a decision to stop waiting for the rain. He is not going to wait anymore for an external force to act on the world he finds intolerable. He is going to act on it himself. The physical training runs alongside the weapons work as 2 aspects of the same project. Travis is building himself into a specific kind of person, a person capable of the thing he has decided needs to happen. He is constructing from the raw material of his damaged and insomniac and lonely body, something that fits the role he has assigned himself in the story he is telling.
The story requires a man of action. It requires someone who can move without hesitation, who can take damage without being stopped, who has prepared thoroughly enough that when the moment comes, he will not fail at the practical level, even if everything else is complicated. Travis approaches this construction with the seriousness of a craftsman. He does not do it badly. There is a moment in the training sequences where Travis holds a gun up in front of the television and points it at whatever image is on the screen. A politician speaking, a game show, a woman dancing. He aims at each of these images in turn, tracking them, practicing the motion. The television does not know it is being aimed at. The images do not flinch. Travis sits in the dark with a loaded weapon pointed at the light of the screen, and the film watches him do this without comment. This is one of the images that has stayed in cultural memory from Taxi Driver, partly because of the "you talking to me" mirror scene that comes from similar material, but partly because of what it quietly shows about the way Travis's mind is now organizing the world. Everything is a target. Everything is something to be aimed at. The categories of things that deserve to be allowed to continue and things that should be stopped have collapsed into a single category, which is whatever is in front of the gun. The mirror scene arrives from within this context, and it deserves to be approached slowly. Travis is alone in his apartment. He has been practicing with the sleeve mechanism. He stands in front of the bathroom mirror in his USMC jacket, the same jacket he wore for his job interview, the jacket that has his name on it, the jacket that connects him to the only institutional identity he has ever had. He looks at himself. He begins to talk. The words he uses are the words of a confrontation, a challenge being issued to someone who has crossed a line. Someone who is about to find out that Travis Bickle is not a person to be crossed. He asks the mirror who it thinks it is talking to. He answers his own question. He escalates the scenario. He produces the sleeve gun. He practices the draw, the point, the threat. The "you talking to me" sequence was largely improvised by Robert De Niro. The script indicated that Travis speaks to himself in the mirror, but did not specify the exact dialogue. De Niro arrived on the day of shooting having worked on the material himself, having developed the specific rhythm and escalation of the scene, and what he performed was a piece of character work so precise and so revealing that it has become one of the most recognized scenes in American cinema history. It has been parodied hundreds of times. It has been quoted in contexts completely removed from the film. It has become a kind of cultural shorthand for a certain posture of aggressive self-assertion, which is one of the great ironies of its legacy. Because in context, it is not a scene of power. It is a scene of profound loneliness. Travis is talking to himself. There is no one else in the room. The confrontation he is rehearsing is a confrontation with an imaginary opponent, because there are no real opponents in his life. No one who has directly challenged him in a way he can respond to. Betsy did not challenge him. She simply left. The city does not challenge him. It simply continues, regardless of his presence. The imaginary person in the mirror is the only adversary Travis can find who will stay still long enough to be talked to. And so he talks to it. And the speech escalates. And he draws the gun. And the mirror shows him exactly what he wants to see, which is someone dangerous, someone not to be messed with, someone who has prepared and is ready and will not be dismissed again. De Niro performed the scene repeatedly from multiple angles over several hours of shooting, and the final cut uses elements from several of those takes, building the sequence with an editorial rhythm that mirrors the escalation and Travis's own internal state. Chapman's cinematography in the mirror scene is unusually flat, the light coming from directly in front, reducing shadow,
making Travis look both hyper-real and slightly unreal at the same time, like an image rather than a person. Which is, in a sense, what he is becoming. He is constructing an image of himself in that mirror to replace the self that has no clear shape. The image is armed and dangerous and certain of its purpose. The self it is replacing was confused and lonely and could not make the world hold still. The image is better. The image will do what needs to be done. Travis practices until the image is convincing enough, and then he goes back out into the night. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Travis built himself into something in that apartment. Something armed and certain and aimed. In the next section, we follow him out of the mirror and into the world, where the image he constructed is about to meet reality for the first time. And the first target he chooses is not the one he will ultimately reach. Section 7. You talking to me? There is a version of Travis Bickle that the culture remembers, and there is the version that actually exists in the film. And the distance between those two versions is one of the most interesting things about Taxi Driver's legacy. The version the culture remembers is the one from the mirror. The mohawk, the sleeve gun, the you talking to me. That version has been reprinted on t-shirts and referenced in television shows and parodied by comedians and quoted at parties by people who have never seen the film and by people who have seen it many times. That version reads as cool. It reads as a certain kind of dangerous confidence, a man who has found his power, a man who will not be pushed around anymore. The version that actually exists in the film is a man alone in a bathroom talking to his own reflection, because there is no one else available to talk to. The gap between those two readings is the gap between what Travis believes about himself and what the film knows about him. And holding both of those things in mind at the same time is essential to understanding what Taxi Driver is actually doing in its second half. By the time Travis has completed his physical transformation and armed himself and rehearsed his confrontations in the mirror, he is operating inside a psychological framework that has become almost entirely self-referential. The diary is no longer an attempt to make sense of experience. It is a document of certainty. The entries from this period of the film have a different quality from the earlier ones. Less exploratory, less searching, more declarative. He knows what the world is. He knows what needs to be done. He knows that he is the person to do it. The questioning, uncertain voice of the early diary, the voice that was trying on phrases and hoping something would fit, has been replaced by something that sounds decided. The problem with a decided voice is that it has stopped taking in new information. It has stopped being a voice that asks questions. It only makes statements now. Travis begins attending Senator Palentine's campaign rallies. He shows up in crowds, watching. He is dressed inconspicuously at first, blending in with the people around him, observing the senator from a distance. His diary from this period describes Palentine with a contempt that is striking in its specificity. The contempt of someone who has already made up his mind about a target, rather than the contempt of someone who has genuinely examined a political figure and found him wanting. Travis does not dislike Palentine because of his positions on policy, or his record, or anything substantive about his public life. Travis dislikes Palentine because Palentine represents the world that Betsy chose over him. The senator is a symbol. He stands for everything that found Travis insufficient and turned away. Killing him would be, in Travis's private logic, a way of acting on the world that dismissed him, a way of making the dismissal cost something. This is the thread the film handles with particular care, because it would be easy and reductive to present Travis's political violence as ideologically motivated and leave it there. The film does not do that. It shows the viewer, through the diary and through Travis's behavior around Palantine, that the political target is personal, in a way that Travis himself probably does not fully recognize. He has dressed his wound in the language of action and purpose, the language of a man who sees clearly and is willing to do what others will not. But underneath that language, the wound is still just a wound. A woman did not want him. The world did not have a place for him. And Palantine is the nearest available object for the rage that those two facts have been generating since the night Betsy walked away from the pornographic theater. He acquires a Secret Service agent's credential from somewhere, the film does not specify how, and begins appearing at campaign events with it clipped to his jacket. He watches the security arrangements. He notes the positions of the agents. He is doing reconnaissance in the methodical way that the physical training and the weapons work have taught him to prepare for things. At one rally, he gets close enough that a Secret Service agent notices him and makes eye contact. Something in Travis's face or posture, or the quality of his stillness in a moving crowd, triggers the agent's instincts. Travis is made. He turns and walks away through the crowd, moving quickly, disappearing before anyone can stop him or ask questions. He does not run. He simply moves, and the crowd absorbs him, and he is gone. The near miss at the rally is a pivot point that the film handles with a quiet precision that rewards close attention. Travis walks away from the Palantine event having failed at the first version of his mission. The Secret Service has noticed him. He cannot go back to that environment without significant risk. The plan, such as it was, is no longer viable. And Travis does not fall apart at this realization. He does not go home and write in his diary about defeat, or recalibrate towards something saner. He simply redirects. The violence that was aimed at Palantine was always, at some level, aimed at the idea Palantine represented. Now that the specific target is unavailable, the violence needs somewhere else to go. It finds Iris. More precisely, it finds sport, and the hotel, and the world that holds Iris inside it. Travis does not experience this as a change of plan. He experiences it as a clarification. This redirection is psychologically honest in a way that makes the film uncomfortable to sit with, because it shows how the surface justification for violence, the political target, the righteous assassination, was always secondary to the underlying pressure that needed release. Travis was going to act. The form the action took was, in some important sense, negotiable. What was not negotiable was the action itself. The need to do something large and irreversible that would make the world acknowledge him, that would force the world that had been moving past him in the sealed glass of the cab window to finally stop and look. Palantine would have given him that. The brothel will give him that. The specific justification changes. The need underneath it does not. The Mohawk appears in this section of the film, the decision Travis makes about his own appearance in the days before the final act, and it deserves the same kind of slow attention that the mirror scene deserves. He shaves the sides of his head and leaves a strip down the center, the haircut associated with soldiers preparing for combat, the style worn by the 101st Airborne paratroopers who flew into Normandy on D-Day. Travis is not going to Normandy. He is going to a brothel on the west side. But the haircut communicates something specific about what the act means to him. He is not approaching what comes next as a crime, or as a breakdown, or as the final expression of a psychology that has been deteriorating for months. He is approaching it as a mission. He is a soldier again. He is someone with a unit and a purpose, and an enemy clearly designated. The Marine who drove a taxi for a year and watched the world through glass is going back to being a Marine, or at least to the version of a Marine that his damaged mind can still access. Scorsese has spoken about the way he shot Travis in this final pre-violence section of the film as being almost devotional in its quality, referencing the visual tradition of saints preparing for martyrdom, figures from religious painting who move toward their fate with a specific kind of terrible serenity. Travis, in these sequences, does have that quality. He is not agitated. He is not frantic. He moves through his preparations with a calm that is more frightening than agitation would be, because calm implies completion, implies a mind that has finished its arguing with itself and arrived at a place of resolution. The storm that has been building through the entire film has gone very quiet in the hours before it breaks. His diary entry from this period is one of the most discussed in the film. He writes that he has taken the organization of his life into his own hands, that he is now a person of action, that the work he is about to do is important and necessary. He signs off one entry with a kind of farewell quality, not explicitly a suicide note, but carrying the tone of someone who is not entirely certain they will be writing again. He has written letters to his parents. He has put his affairs, such as they are, in order. He is ready. The specificity of that readiness, the quiet organizational competence of a man who in every other area of his life has been fragmented and confused, is one of the film's most chilling qualities. Travis was always capable of focus. He was always capable of discipline. The tragedy is that the only project he ever found that was large enough to organize all of that capacity around was this one. Bernard Herrmann's score in these sequences shifts in a way that is subtle but precise. The saxophone theme that has accompanied Travis through the film is still present, but it is lower now, more submerged, giving way to something that builds underneath it, a slow percussion and a gathering orchestral tension that does not resolve. The music knows something is coming. It has been building toward it for the entire film. Herrmann wrote this music while dying, though he did not know that was what was happening. And there is an argument to be made that the score's particular quality of gathered darkness comes partly from that, from a man composing at the edge of his own ending, without being aware that is what he was doing. Whether or not that reading is fair to the music, the effect of it on the film is undeniable. The score in the final section of Taxi Driver feels like weather about to break. Travis loads the guns the night before. He checks the sleeve mechanism one more time. He stands in front of the mirror one last time, but this time there is no performance, no escalating confrontation with the reflection. He just looks at himself. The camera holds on his face for a long moment. The face that looks back from the mirror is not the face of a man who is afraid or uncertain. It is the face of a man who has made a decision he is at peace with. And the peace is the most frightening thing the film has shown yet. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Travis is ready. The city is quiet outside his window. In the next section, the plan he built around one man collapses, and what replaces it is something rawer and more personal. A mission that was always about Iris, but is now also, in ways Travis cannot separate out, about everything else the city has done to him. Section 8. The Mohawk and the Mission. The morning Travis goes to the Palatine rally for the last time, he is dressed differently from any version of himself the film has shown before. The mohawk is visible under a hat he wears pulled low. He has on his army jacket, and beneath it, the guns are distributed across his body in the configuration he practiced for weeks in the apartment. The sleeve mechanism on his right forearm, the other weapons holstered, and ready at various points. He moves through the crowd toward the stage where Palantine is speaking, and the camera follows him from behind at a slight distance in a way that keeps him small inside the frame. The crowd around him is large and loud and entirely unaware of what is moving through it. Travis is a current running under the surface of a normal afternoon, invisible until the moment it is not. He gets closer than the film's earlier rally scene allowed. The security arrangements are different today, or his approach is better, or simply the crowd is dense enough that the agents cannot watch every face at once. He moves through the press of bodies toward the rope line, where Palantine will pass within reach. His face under the hat is completely still. He is in the place he prepared for, doing the thing he prepared to do. And the calm of his preparation is holding. He reaches the rope line. Palantine is approaching along it, shaking hands, working the crowd with the practiced ease of a professional politician. Travis is close enough now. His hand moves toward the sleeve. A Secret Service agent sees him. Not the same agent from before, or perhaps the same one with a better angle this time, but someone whose training has flagged something in Travis's stillness, in the quality of his attention. And the way he is watching Palantine, rather than responding to him the way the rest of the crowd is responding. The agent moves toward Travis. Their eyes meet. For a fraction of a second, the two men are looking directly at each other across the crowd. And in that fraction of a second, something passes between them that Travis recognizes immediately. He has been seen. Not the way Betsy saw him, not with curiosity or warmth or even dismissal. He has been seen as a threat. He has been identified as the thing he actually is in this moment, and the identification is going to produce consequences he cannot escape. He turns and walks away, fast but not running, because running confirms everything, and running gets you caught. He moves through the crowd against its current, shoulders down, hat pulled, and the crowd parts around him without knowing why, instinctively giving space to whatever is broadcasting from his body in that moment. He is out of the square and onto the street and into the city before anyone has organized a pursuit. The rally continues behind him. Palantine's voice carries over the loudspeakers, still addressing the crowd, still running for president, entirely unaware of what almost happened at the rope line. Travis walks for a long time after this. The film gives him that walking, that long movement through the city streets in the afternoon light, and it is one of the sequences where the film shows its confidence in De Niro's ability to carry meaning without dialogue or voiceover. He is not in the cab. He is not in the apartment. He is just a man on a street in the city, moving, with the guns still on him, and the plan now blown, and the pressure that was supposed to discharge into the Palantine event still entirely contained inside his body, with nowhere to go. He passes people going about their afternoons. He passes shops and traffic, and the ordinary movement of a city that does not know he exists. He walks through it like a current that has lost its circuit. What happens in Travis's mind during this walk is not stated in the film, and does not need to be, because the next scene shows the result of it. He goes back to the west side. He finds the block where Sport works. He finds the hotel. He has been here before, has sat in its rooms and eaten breakfast near it, and thought about it for weeks. He knows its layout in the way a soldier knows terrain he has reconnoitered. The mission has not ended. The mission has relocated. The target that was always more personal, always more deeply connected to the pressure that has been building since before Palantine was ever in his sightline, has been waiting here the whole time. Sport is on the street outside the hotel when Travis arrives. Harvey Keitel plays Sport with a specific and deeply unpleasant kind of charisma. A man who has organized his entire presentation around a performed version of intimacy, who speaks to the girls he manages in the language of love and partnership, while the actual structure of the relationship is one of absolute control. He is not a cartoon villain. He is something more banal and therefore more disturbing. A person who has found a way to make exploitation feel, at least on the surface, like something else. When Travis encounters him on the street, Sport recognizes him from previous visits and responds with the easy confidence of a man on his own territory. A man who has handled situations like this before and expects to handle this one the same way. Travis shoots him. Not immediately. There is a brief exchange first, words that establish the territory of the confrontation. And then, Travis shoots Sport in the stomach and walks past him into the hotel. Sport doubles over on the street behind him. Travis does not look back. He is inside the building now, moving through the hallway toward the stairs. And the film enters a different register from everything that came before it. The violence that follows is not exciting in the conventional cinematic sense. It is not choreographed or elegant or accompanied by music that tells the viewer how to feel about it. It is loud and ugly and fast, and then suddenly very quiet. And the quiet afterward is almost harder to watch than the violence itself. The detail of what happens inside the hotel will be examined more fully in the next section, because the shootout and its aftermath constitute their own discrete movement in the film's final act. What matters here, in the space between Travis leaving the rally and Travis entering the hotel, is the quality of the transition itself. He did not go home and reconsider. He did not return to the diary and write about what happened, did not process the failed assassination attempt and question whether the whole project was built on something broken. He redirected with an immediacy that reveals how complete the commitment was. The decision to act was not attached to the specific target. The decision to act was the only decision Travis had made in months that felt fully his own. And he was not going to unmake it because one door had closed. Iris is upstairs in the hotel. She does not know what is happening on the street below or in the hallway or on the stairs. She does not know that the person who sat across from her in a diner and told her she should not be here has arrived to enforce that opinion with the guns he spent weeks acquiring and practicing with. She is in a room doing what the room requires of her. The film cuts to her briefly in these moments before the violence reaches her floor, and the contrast between her small, ordinary presence in that room and the catastrophic approach of Travis's mission is one of the film's most carefully managed tonal effects. She is a child in a bad situation. He is a war veteran with 4 guns and nothing left to lose. The rescue is going to be, the film understands, a violent thing to survive, even for the person being rescued. The mohawk that seemed like a symbol of mission preparation in Travis's apartment looks different on the street outside the hotel, in the afternoon light, on a man walking towards something that cannot be undone. It looks less like the insignia of a soldier and more like the mark of someone who has decided to stop being invisible. Travis has spent the entire film invisible, behind glass, inside the cab, watching the world without being seen by it. The mohawk makes him visible. It announces him. It says, in the language of appearance rather than words, that the person wearing it is done moving through the city without being noticed. Whatever happens next, Travis Bickle will be seen. Scorsese said later that he was not sure, when making the film, whether Travis was a hero or a monster, and that the film was built to sustain both readings simultaneously, without resolving them. The genius of that ambiguity is not that it lets the viewer decide based on personal preference. It is that it insists both things are true at the same time. Travis is acting on something real when he walks into that hotel. The situation he is walking toward is genuinely bad, and Iris genuinely needs to be away from it. He is also a deeply damaged man whose psychological state has been deteriorating for months, whose violence is connected to wounds that have nothing to do with Iris, whose heroism and his pathology are so thoroughly entangled in this moment that separating them is not possible. Both things are true. The film holds them both. The viewer has to hold them too. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Travis walked through the door. In the next section, we follow him all the way through what happens inside, through the blood and the silence and the moment that follows, and into the deeply strange and troubling question of what the film does with the wreckage it has built. Section 9. The Bloodbath and the Hero. There is a quality to the final act of Taxi Driver that is unlike anything else in the film, and unlike almost anything else in American cinema from that period. The violence that Travis has been building toward across the entire length of the movie arrives not with the dramatic clarity of a conventional action sequence, but with something messier and more disturbing. Something that keeps refusing to resolve into the clean, moral shape that movie violence usually takes.
It is loud and fast and ugly, and then suddenly, shockingly quiet. And the quiet that follows is almost harder to process than the violence itself, because the quiet arrives without the emotional resolution that the violence was supposed to provide. The film does not feel finished after the shooting. It feels interrupted, like something that was supposed to conclude a certain way and then didn't, and nobody in the movie or outside it is entirely sure what to do with the ending that actually arrived. The sequence begins before Travis enters the building. He has already shot Sport on the street outside, catching him off guard, putting a bullet in his stomach and walking past him and into the hotel lobby without looking back. Sport doubles over on the pavement. Travis moves through the door. The lobby is dim and narrow and smells, the film implies through everything about how it is shot, of everything that has happened inside it. A man at a desk in the lobby looks up at Travis and reaches for something, a weapon or an alarm, and Travis shoots him in the hand. The man screams. Travis moves past him toward the stairs. Everything is happening fast, but not in the kinetic, controlled way of choreographed film violence. It is happening fast in the way that actual dangerous events happen fast. With too much noise and too much confusion, and no clear sense in the moment of what is coming next. He goes up the stairs. On the landing, he encounters a man who draws a weapon and fires, hitting Travis in the arm. Travis returns fire and kills him. He keeps moving upward, his arm bleeding, the sleeve mechanism on his right wrist now compromised by the wound. He reaches the floor where Iris's room is. He moves down the hallway. Sport, who has not died from the stomach wound Travis left him with on the street, appears at the end of the hall. Sport has managed to get himself upright and back inside the building. He fires at Travis. Travis is hit again. He shoots Sport, and this time Sport goes down completely and does not get up. Travis keeps moving. He is bleeding from multiple wounds now, moving through a narrow hallway in a building where the walls are close and the light is bad, and everything smells of something he cannot name. And he is still moving forward, because the mission is not complete, and he has not yet run out of the thing that has been carrying him through this. He reaches the room. He enters it. Inside there is a man, a client, who is present in the room with Iris. Travis shoots him through the hand, pinning him to the wall. Then he shoots him again. The violence in this room is the most prolonged and the most directly witnessed of anything in the sequence. And Scorsese made deliberate choices about how to film it that are worth examining carefully. He shot the entire sequence from slightly overhead, the camera placed at an angle that looks down on the room from above. And the effect of that angle is specific and intentional. It creates distance. It removes the viewer from the eye-level, immersive position that conventional action filmmaking uses to make violence feel exciting and involving. And it replaces that position with something more like the perspective of a witness or a recording device, something that sees everything and comments on nothing. The overhead angle is the visual equivalent of the film's moral position on what Travis is doing, which is to show it completely and refuse to editorialize about it. Iris is in the room through all of this. She is crouched in a corner, her hands over her face, screaming. This is the detail that cuts through everything else in the sequence. The person Travis came to save is screaming in a corner while he methodically works through the room. She is not watching him with gratitude or relief. She is experiencing what is happening as chaos, as terror, as a violent event that is happening in her immediate vicinity, regardless of whatever moral architecture it exists inside. Travis does not register her screaming in any visible way. He is operating inside the mission, inside the prepared and certain state he has been building toward for months. And the screaming is outside that state, in a register he cannot currently access. The rescue and the terror of the person being rescued are happening simultaneously in the same small room, and the film holds both of them in the frame at the same time, without allowing either to cancel the other out. Travis sinks to the floor when he runs out of targets and out of the forward momentum that has been carrying him through the building. He is bleeding from at least 3 wounds. He sits against the wall in the hallway outside the room, his back against the plaster, and he tries to point a finger gun at his own head. The gesture, a mimicking of the suicide he has been circling throughout the film, is blocked when he discovers he has run out of bullets. He sits there. The building has gone quiet around him. Sport is dead in the hallway. The men inside the room are dead or severely wounded. Iris is still in the room. Travis is on the floor, bleeding, pointing an empty finger at his own temple. And the film holds this image for a moment that feels much longer than it actually is. The police arrive. They move through the building and find what Travis has made of it. And they find Travis at the center of it, sitting on the floor with blood pooling around him. He survives. This fact is important, and the film does not underline it dramatically. Travis simply survives because people in this condition sometimes do, because the ambulance comes quickly enough, because the wounds are serious but not immediately fatal. He is taken to a hospital. He recovers. The film documents this recovery in a sequence that is as deliberately flat and undramatic as anything Scorsese ever shot. Newspaper headlines and police reports assembled in a montage that covers the gap between the shooting and Travis's return to the city with the brisk efficiency of a summary rather than the emotional weight of a conclusion. The newspaper coverage is where the film makes its most disturbing and most precise observation about the world Travis inhabits. The headlines call him a hero. The articles describe the shooting in terms of a vigilante rescue, a lone veteran who entered a criminal operation and dismantled it at personal risk to save a child. Iris's parents write a letter to Travis from their home in Pittsburgh, expressing their gratitude for what he did for their daughter, their relief that she is home and safe, their sense that he is a good and brave man. The letter is warm and genuine and completely without irony from the perspective of the people who wrote it. They are not wrong to feel what they feel. Their daughter is home. The situation that was holding her is gone. From the outside, from the position of 2 parents in Pittsburgh reading newspaper accounts of what happened in a hotel on the West Side, Travis Bickle saved their child.
That is a true statement. It sits alongside everything else that is also true about Travis Bickle, and the film requires the viewer to hold all of those truths at the same time without the comfort of having them resolve into a single, coherent verdict. Roger Ebert wrote about this ending with the insight that it functions not on a dramatic level, but on an emotional one. That it completes the story, as music completes a phrase, rather than as plot completes an argument. That observation is exactly right, and it points toward what the film is doing in its final movement that conventional narrative analysis tends to miss. The ending of Taxi Driver does not answer the questions the film has been raising. It simply stops asking them and leaves the viewer holding them alone. Was Travis's violence heroic or pathological? Can the same act be both of those things simultaneously? What does it mean that a city so broken it could not protect a 12-year-old girl from being sold on its streets can still organize a consensus about who deserves to be called a hero? The film poses all of these questions through the mechanics of its ending and answers none of them, which is the correct choice, and also the deeply uncomfortable one. Scorsese has spoken about the ending in religious terms, connecting it to the tradition of the saint who seeks martyrdom, who performs an act of terrible violence in the service of a genuine moral purpose, and then offers himself for punishment and finds that punishment withheld. Travis tried to die. He made the gesture of self-destruction, the finger against the temple at the end of the sequence. The ending he had prepared for, the death with honor that the samurai tradition he was half-consciously invoking would have required, was denied to him by the simple fact that he ran out of bullets before he ran out of targets. He survived when he had expected and perhaps needed not to. And the world, rather than prosecuting him for the 3 men he killed, gave him a letter from a grateful family and a quiet return to the streets. The martyrdom he aimed for became celebrity he did not ask for. And the film treats this irony with a stillness that is more devastating than any editorial comment could have been. The overhead shot that Scorsese used during the violence has been discussed extensively in the decades since the film's release, and Scorsese himself has offered a specific reason for the choice. He said that he felt the violence as he had originally planned to film it, at eye level and immersive, would have been too exciting, that it would have made the sequence pleasurable in a way that the film could not afford it to be. The overhead angle was a way of pulling the camera back from complicity, of filming what happens without inviting the viewer to enjoy it. Whether that strategy fully succeeds is a question that different viewers answer differently, and the disagreement itself is part of what makes the film so durable as an object of thought. There are people who watch the ending of Taxi Driver and feel the violence as cathartic, as satisfying, as the release that has been building through the entire film finally arriving. There are people who watch the same footage and feel only a kind of nauseated unease. Both responses are being invited simultaneously, which is either a flaw in the film's moral architecture or its most sophisticated quality, depending on where you stand. Bernard Herrmann's score in the aftermath sequence is among the most quietly devastating things in his entire body of work. After the violence ends and the police arrive and the building returns to silence, the score does something unexpected. It does not resolve into triumph or tragedy. It returns, slowly, to the saxophone theme that has accompanied Travis through the entire film. The same heavy, half-submerged melody that was present in the opening sequence, that has been playing underneath all the night driving and the diary entries and the long looks through the cab window at a city Travis could not enter. The melody comes back as if nothing has happened, as if the violence was an interruption in something that was always going to continue. The continuity of the music across the violence, the fact that the same theme plays before and after the bloodbath without marking the bloodbath as a transformation, is the score's way of saying what the film has been saying all along.
Travis has not been fixed. Travis has not been resolved. Travis has simply survived and returned to the streets where he started, carrying whatever he is carrying, pointed at whatever comes next. Iris goes home to Pittsburgh. This is documented in the newspaper clippings and in her parents' letter. She is back at school. She is safe, or safer, in the way that being removed from immediate danger constitutes a form of safety, even when the conditions that produce the danger are still present in the world. What the film does not show, and what it is careful not to speculate about, is what the experience of being rescued in that particular way has done to Iris. She was in that room. She heard what happened in the hallway. She was crouching in a corner screaming while the man who had decided to save her worked through the building. Whether the rescue felt like rescue from the inside, from her position in that corner with her hands over her face, is a question the film declines to answer. It shows the outcome, the letter from Pittsburgh, the safe return, and leaves the interior of Iris's experience of events entirely to the viewer's imagination. Travis returns to driving a cab. This is perhaps the most chilling fact in the entire film, presented as simply as any other plot point, slipped into the montage of the aftermath without emphasis or alarm. He heals. He goes back to work. He is on the streets again at night. The same streets, the same city, the same sealed cab, moving through the same deep reds and sickly yellows of a New York that has not changed because Travis passed through a violent episode and survived it. He picks up Betsy one night. She gets into his cab and recognizes him, and seems, in the context of the newspaper coverage she has clearly seen, to regard him with something like admiration. Or at least, with the complex mixture of feelings that attaches to a person who has been in the news for doing something violent and ambiguous. Travis drives her to her destination and refuses her fare. He watches her in the rearview mirror as she walks away. He pulls back into traffic. Then comes the final shot, and it is the image the film has been building toward since its opening frames. Travis is driving. The city is moving past the windows. Everything looks like it always has. And then, without any particular provocation, without any visible trigger, Travis glances up at the rearview mirror. The camera catches his eyes in the glass. His expression shifts. Something crosses his face that is not quite identifiable, not quite nameable. A flicker of something that moves through and is gone before it can be read clearly. Scorsese has been specific about what that glance means. It means that Travis is still in there. That whatever produced the violence, whatever combination of loneliness and pressure and damaged psychology and failed connection built up over the months the film has documented, is still present and unresolved inside the man behind the wheel. He is not cured. He is not transformed. He is driving. And someday, the film implies with the absolute quietness of a single glance in a mirror, this will happen again. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The city called Travis a hero and put him back on the streets. In the final section, we sit with what the ending actually means, what Scorsese confirmed about that last look in the mirror, and what Taxi Driver has been saying all along about loneliness, violence, and the stories a broken mind tells itself in order to survive. Section 10. The Rearview Mirror. There is a particular kind of ending that does not feel like an ending. It feels like a pause, a held breath, a moment where the story stops moving forward. Not because it has arrived somewhere, but because it has shown you everything it has to show, and is now simply waiting for you to understand what you have been looking at. The final minutes of Taxi Driver have that quality. That sense of a film that has completed its argument without resolving its tension. That has followed a man all the way to the edge of destruction and back, and then returned him, unchanged and unrepaired, to the streets where he started. The city is the same. The cab is the same. The nights are the same. And Travis Bickle, healed from his wounds and celebrated in the press, and carrying a letter of gratitude from a family in Pittsburgh, is driving again through a New York that does not know what to do with him any more than it ever did. Martin Scorsese has been asked about the ending of Taxi Driver more times than he could count across the 50 years since the film's release. And his answer has been consistent. The final glance in the rearview mirror is not a sign of peace. It is not the gesture of a man who has processed what happened and arrived at something resembling resolution. It is, Scorsese has said explicitly, a warning. A signal that whatever produced the violence is still active inside Travis, still present and unresolved, still capable of building again toward the same conclusion, or a different one. Travis did not go through a transformative experience in the hotel. He went through a violent one. Those are not the same thing. Transformation requires a change in the underlying conditions. Travis's underlying conditions, the loneliness, the insomnia, the sealed-off relationship to a city he moves through without being part of, the psychology that cannot make lasting contact with other people, the damage that the war and the years before the film and the months the film documents have accumulated inside him. None of that has changed. He survived. He recovered. He drives. The rearview mirror shows the viewer a man who is one bad night away from beginning again. This is the ending the film earned, and it is important to understand why it is the correct ending, rather than simply a bleak one. A version of Taxi Driver that ended with Travis's death would have been tidier. It would have given the violence a consequence that the moral universe of a conventional narrative requires. The man who breaks the social contract pays for breaking it. A version that ended with Travis genuinely transformed, awakened by his experience to some new understanding of himself and his place in things, would have been warmer. It would have given the audience the catharsis of a journey completed. Scorsese and Schrader gave the viewer neither of those endings, because neither of those endings was honest. What was honest was Travis alive and driving, the city unchanged around him, the wound that produced everything the film documented, still open and still unaddressed. The honest ending is the uncomfortable one. The film was always willing to be uncomfortable. Paul Schrader has said that when he wrote the script, he was not sure whether the ending was meant to be read as real or as the dying fantasy of a man bleeding out on a hotel floor. He left that ambiguity in the writing deliberately. Scorsese has since said that he believes the events of the ending are real, that Travis actually survived and was actually celebrated and actually returned to the streets, but that the slightly dreamlike quality of the final sequence is intentional, a visual register shift that marks what the characters and the city have made of Travis, rather than what Travis actually is. The newspaper headlines that call him a hero exist in the same world as the overhead shot that filmed his violence with the neutrality of a security camera. Both things are real. The city's verdict on what Travis did and the film's recording of what Travis did are two completely different documents of the same event, and the gap between them is where the ending lives. The hero narrative that the press constructs around Travis in the aftermath of the shooting is worth examining in some detail, because it is doing more than simply providing an ironic counterpoint to what the viewer has witnessed. It is making an argument about how societies process violence when the violence produces an outcome they approve of. The men Travis killed
were a pimp and his associates. The person Travis recovered from that environment was a 12-year-old girl. From the outside, from the position of anyone reading a newspaper account, without access to the interior of Travis's psychology, the action looks like exactly what the headlines say it is. A veteran took it upon himself to remove a criminal operation that was exploiting a child. He was shot multiple times doing it. He succeeded. The child is home. From that angle, hero is not an unreasonable word. What the newspaper cannot see, and what the film has spent nearly 2 hours showing, is everything that produced that action and everything that accompanied it. The months of deterioration, the failed connection with Betsy and what it did to his psychology, the guns purchased from a man in a hotel room, the weeks of physical training and mirror rehearsals, the planned assassination of a presidential candidate that was only redirected to the brothel because the Secret Service made the original target unavailable. The fact that Iris was screaming in a corner while her rescue was happening. The finger pointed at his own temple when the shooting was done. None of this appears in the newspaper. None of this is part of the hero narrative. The hero narrative requires a clean act with a clean motivation and a clean outcome. And the film has shown the viewer that there was nothing clean about any of it. The gap between the newspaper and the film is the gap between the story a city tells about its violence and the reality of what violence actually is and where it actually comes from. Betsy's final appearance in the film is brief and carefully constructed. She gets into Travis's cab, recognizes him, and the interaction that follows is quiet and slightly charged in a way that is hard to categorize. She is not afraid of him. She does not treat him as a threat. She treats him with the particular mixture of wariness and curiosity that attaches to a person who has become publicly significant in an ambiguous way. She has read the newspaper coverage. She knows what he did. And whatever she thought of him before, whatever she concluded about him when she walked out of the pornographic theater and stopped returning his calls, the newspaper coverage has given him a new context that does not entirely override the old one, but sits alongside it in a way she has not yet resolved. Travis drives her to her destination. He refuses the fare. He watches her in the rearview mirror as she gets out and walks away without looking back. This final interaction between Travis and Betsy has been interpreted in multiple ways over the decades, and the film supports more than one reading. There is a reading in which it represents some small form of closure. The woman who rejected him now sitting in his cab with something like respect. The wound of the rejection given a partial, imperfect dressing by the changed circumstances of his public identity. There is a reading in which it is deeply ironic. The city's hero narrative doing for Travis what his genuine self could not, making him acceptable to the world by hiding everything about him that made him unacceptable. There is a reading in which it is simply sad. Two people who briefly occupied adjacent spaces in each other's lives, passing through each other's presence one more time, on the way to wherever they are going. Neither of them quite able to say what the encounter was or what it meant. All three readings are available in the scene. The film does not close any of them off. What the film does close off, definitively and without apology, is any reading of Travis Bickle as a simple figure. He cannot be reduced to a monster. He cannot be elevated to a hero. He cannot be explained away as a product of Vietnam or of New York or of mental illness, though all of those things are present in him and contributed to what he became. He is, as Schrader said in a 1976 interview on Chicago radio, a study of one disintegrating personality. And the disintegration the film documents is specific and textured, and resistant to the kinds of clean categorization that would make it easier to dismiss or easier to celebrate. Travis is a person. He is a damaged, lonely, violent, occasionally tender, psychologically unwell, genuinely suffering person. And the film treats him as all of those things simultaneously, because that is what he is. The real-world legacy of the film deepened this complexity in ways that nobody involved in making it anticipated or wanted. On March 30th, 1981, 5 years after the film's release, a young man named John Hinckley Jr. shot President Ronald Reagan outside the Washington Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C.
Hinckley had become obsessed with Taxi Driver, had watched it repeatedly, had constructed an identification with Travis Bickle so complete that he shaved his head into a mohawk and dressed in an army jacket. His stated motive for the assassination attempt was to impress Jodie Foster, replicating what he understood to be Travis's gesture of violent action performed for the attention of a woman. Reagan survived. A press secretary named James Brady was shot in the head and suffered permanent brain damage. 3 other people were wounded. Hinckley was arrested at the scene. Scorsese's response to the news was severe. He has said that upon hearing what happened, he considered leaving the film industry entirely. That the weight of the connection between his film and a real act of political violence was something he did not know how to carry. He eventually continued working, but the Hinckley shooting changed forever the context in which Taxi Driver is discussed and viewed. A film about a man who plans to assassinate a presidential candidate, made as a psychological portrait of a disintegrating mind, had been used as a blueprint by an actual person attempting an actual assassination. The question of what responsibility, if any, the film bears for that use is one that has no clean answer, and that the film itself, with its careful refusal to endorse or condemn Travis's perspective, was perhaps always going to be vulnerable to. What Hinckley's identification with Travis demonstrates, among other things, is the danger of the film's most powerful quality, which is its immersive access to Travis's interior. The film places the viewer inside Travis's perspective so completely, with such sustained intimacy, that a viewer without the critical distance to maintain a distinction between understanding a perspective and inhabiting it can lose the boundary between the two. Leonardo DiCaprio described watching the film at 15 and feeling so identified with Travis that when the film revealed who Travis actually was, he felt genuinely deceived, genuinely surprised, as though the revelation was about someone he had trusted. That response, in a 15-year-old with enough critical distance to reflect on the experience afterward, is the correct response. In someone without that distance, or with a psychological profile that made the identification feel literal rather than cinematic, the same immersive quality produced something catastrophically different. This is not an argument against the film. It is an observation about the specific kind of power that Taxi Driver has, and the specific risks that power carries. Art that reaches deeply enough into the interior of a damaged psychology to make that psychology legible from the inside will always carry the risk of being used by someone for whom legibility becomes identification. The alternative, art that keeps damaged psychology at a safe analytical distance, at arm's length, clearly labeled as pathological and carefully framed to prevent any sympathetic response, would be safer and would also be far less honest and far less useful. Taxi Driver is useful precisely because it refuses that safety. It makes Travis Bickle human. It makes his suffering real. It makes his logic, such as it is, followable from the inside. And it does all of this while building, through craft and structure and the cumulative weight of what it shows, a portrait of where that logic leads that is as clear and as devastating
as anything American cinema has produced. The cultural life of the film across the 50 years since its release is itself a kind of ongoing argument about what it means and what it is for. The "you talking to me" sequence has been quoted and parodied and referenced so many times, in so many contexts stripped so completely of the scene's original meaning that it has taken on a life almost entirely independent of the film it came from. For many people, the line exists as a piece of cultural vocabulary that has nothing to do with Travis Bickle, nothing to do with a man alone in a bathroom rehearsing confrontations with his own reflection because he has no one else to confront. The meme version of the scene reads as confident and powerful. The actual scene is about a man who is desperately, catastrophically alone. The distance between those two readings is not just a curiosity about how culture processes images. It is a precise illustration of the film's central concern, the gap between how Travis sees himself and what he actually is, played out in the culture's relationship to his most famous moment. There is something else the ending does that tends to get lost in discussions focused on its irony and its ambiguity. Something quieter and harder to name. It is genuinely sad. Not in a manipulative way, not in a way designed to produce tears or to sentimentalize what has come before. Sad in the way that watching a person return to the conditions that were destroying them, unchanged and unhelped, is always sad. Travis is back in the cab. The city is outside the windows. The nights are ahead of him, identical to all the nights before. The same streets and the same passengers and the same sealed glass between himself and a world he cannot enter. He survived the hotel. He survived the wounds. He was called a hero. And he is still, in every way that matters, exactly where he was at the beginning of the film. Alone, awake, driving. The rain he was waiting for came, and it was him, and it cleaned nothing. And he is still here in the middle of the same city, with the same silence inside him, and nowhere particular to go. Schrader wrote in his notes from the period of the script's composition that the taxi driver is the perfect symbol of urban loneliness, because he is always moving and never arriving. He passes through every part of the city and belongs to none of it. He carries every kind of person and knows none of them. He is in motion constantly and is completely, permanently still inside that motion. That is the image the film ends on. Travis in motion, Travis still. The rear-view mirror catching his eyes for one last moment before the frame cuts to black and Herman's saxophone comes back one final time. The same theme, the same weight, the same half-submerged melody that has been playing since the steam rose from the first street grate and the cab emerged from it like something surfacing from underwater. The tragedy of Travis Bickle is not the violence. The violence is a symptom. The tragedy is everything that preceded the violence and everything that will follow it. The long, unbroken chain of nights in the cab and entries in the diary and faces watched through glass. The reaching outward that never quite connects. The pressure that builds and builds in a sealed container with no outlet. The city pouring in and nothing pouring out. It is the tragedy of a person who needed help and lived in a world that did not have the vocabulary for what he needed, who tried to reach toward other people and found himself unable to close the distance, who built himself into something capable of decisive action because decisive action was the only kind of selfhood he could construct from the materials available to him. It is the tragedy, finally, of a mind that was never equipped for the world it found itself in, doing the only things it knew how to do, in a metal box, at night, in a city that would call him a hero, and then forget him, and then be surprised someday when it happened again. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next video.